Welcome to Histology Channel. Dionysus, the god of wine, theater, and religious ecstasy, was born to Zeus and a mortal woman named Semele. He was the first Olympian deity to come from a mortal mother, and, before reaching his divine status, he wandered through far-off regions, spreading his sacred rites and mysteries, and building his cult. Dionysus journeyed across Lydia and the Phrygian plains. He traveled through the Persian highlands and visited the cities of Bactria and Medea. He went as far as the edges of Arabia and roamed across Asia. Along the way, Dionysus revealed his divine nature by introducing his rituals to the people he encountered. He gained followers and solidified his cult in distant lands, paving the way for his triumphant return to Greece. Thebes, where his mother had both been born and met a tragic end, became the final destination of his journey. This was his homeland, the place that had witnessed his mother's life and death. When Dionysus came back to Thebes, he was confronted by something that filled him with anger. His mother's sisters, driven by envy and bitterness, had spread cruel gossip about his parentage. They questioned his divine heritage, suggesting that Semele had been with a mortal man and invented the tale of Zeus to hide her own misdeeds. By dishonoring his mother's name and denying his divine nature, they fueled Dionysus's thirst for revenge. He refused to let falsehood and injustice thrive in the city of his birth. Using his divine powers, he cast a spell on the women of Thebes, unleashing a religious frenzy that consumed them completely. Seized by this overpowering devotion, they left their homes, husbands and children to follow the god into the mountains. On the slopes of Mount Cithaeron, these women, called bacchantes or maenads, engaged in ecstatic rites dedicated to Dionysus. They danced wildly, sang in honor of the wine god, and gave themselves over to earthly delights. Their bodies and spirits reflected an untamed force as they reveled in the freedom granted by the god. Meanwhile, in Thebes, King Pentheus, Dionysus's cousin, grew distressed, watching as the new god overturned the city's order. He refused to acknowledge Dionysus's divine status and viewed the Bacchantes' rites as a menace to society. In his pride and short-sightedness, Pentheus did not realize he was opposing a force far beyond his control, and that his refusal would lead to a tragic end. As the god's influence spread through Thebes, two respected elders, Tiresias the prophet and Cadmus the old king, acknowledged Dionysus's divinity and the need to honor him. Tiresias, wise from a lifetime of reading omens, and Cadmus, who founded Thebes, were moved to join the god's rites. They donned animal skins in place of their usual attire and wore ivy wreaths, symbols of the wine god's power, then prepared to climb the mountains and stand with the Bacchantes, showing their devotion to Dionysus in Thebes. Yet Pentheus would not allow this new reality. When he saw his grandfather Cadmus and the revered Tiresias dressed in animal hides and eager to join the rituals, he flew into a furious outburst. In Pentheus's eyes, these honored figures taking part in wild rites was an insult to the city's heritage, a madness that endangered tradition and the royal family's dignity. Using his ancient knowledge, Tiresias tried to caution Pentheus about the dangers of challenging a god. He explained that Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, gave people relief from their daily struggles, offering joy and communion with something divine. Denying the god's status was a grave offense that would bring dire results for both Pentheus and Thebes. Yet Pentheus, fueled by arrogance and the desire to control, ignored the prophet's words. As ruler, he thought he had the right to bend the city and its people to his will, even if it clashed with that so-called god. Determined to halt the god's rites and penalize anyone taking part, Pentheus commanded his soldiers to seize Dionysus at once. The stranger's charm and the influence he had over Theban women were intolerable to the king, who believed his power and the city's stability were under threat. Following Pentheus's command, the guards tracked down Dionysus as he was explaining his rites and secrets to a group of women. The Bacchantes tried to shield him, but the guards managed to arrest Dionysus and chain him at the palace. Dionysus faced the king without a trace of fear or remorse. His tranquil manner and mysterious grin confused Pentheus, who had anticipated a frightened captive. Troubled by this strange composure, and certain he was dealing with a fraud, the arrogant king had Dionysus locked in the dark, humid palace stables, hidden from public view and cut off from his worshippers. But Pentheus failed to grasp the true power of the deity he scorned. With a divine motion, Dionysus caused an earthquake that rocked the palace to its core, sowing chaos and dread. Walls trembled, columns split, and the ceiling caved in as guards and attendants raced around in alarm. In the midst of the turmoil, Dionysus slipped away, disappearing completely. Shaken by this display of godly force, Pentheus and his men realized their attempt to capture Dionysus was a grave error. The gods' escape made it clear that their struggle was only beginning, and Thebes' traditional rules would soon be challenged like never before. The tension grew when a frightened shepherd arrived, informing Pentheus of the strange happenings he had seen on Mount Cithaeron. He spoke of the ecstatic women and their eerie rites, claiming they could produce water and wine from the ground, and even tame wild beasts. The shepherd also described their extraordinary strength, enough to fight and overpower armed men using only their hands. This report fueled Pentheus's rage, strengthening his determination to destroy Dionysus's worship. Pentheus resolved to go to Mount Cithaeron himself, to observe the women and gather proof of their wicked behavior. Yet Dionysus, ever cunning, had a different plan for the king. He appeared once more, offering a tempting suggestion. Dionysus proposed that Pentheus dress as a woman, allowing him to slip among the Bacchantes unseen. Though he hesitated at first, Pentheus gave in, drawn by the chance to see their hidden ceremonies and prove their depravity. Wearing a long gown with a wig and veil, he became a grotesque version of a woman. Led by his pride and a dark fascination, Pentheus walked straight into the god's snare. Tempted by the chance to view the women's hidden rites, he let himself be drawn in, thinking he was in control. But he had no idea of the fate that awaited him. Enraptured by the god's presence, the Bacchantes quickly sensed that Pentheus was among them. His disguise could not deceive these fervent worshippers, who believed he was some beast. They closed in on him, ready to strike, their eyes lit with a fierce passion, spears raised high. Agave, Pentheus's mother and leader among the Bacchantes in her trance, struck first. She seized her son, who tried in vain to show her who he was, and pinned him down. Drawing on an unnatural power, she ripped his head from his body, raising it like a trophy as the others fell upon him, tearing the king apart. This horrific act showed how pride and neglect of divine power can lead to catastrophe. Agave then marched into Thebes, proudly displaying what she thought was a lion's head atop her staff. Still consumed by her Dionysian frenzy, she boasted of her kill and urged all to rejoice in her achievement. Still in the throes of a trance, Agave presented her father with the proof of her victory, proud of her supposed power and valor. Devastated, Cadmus tried to shake her out of that haze, urging her to question what she had actually hunted. Little by little, Agave returned to her senses, and the veil of madness began to fall from her eyes. Bit by bit, she saw the awful reality. The head she held was not a lion's, but Pentheus's, her own son. That terrible discovery shattered Agave's heart. Her joy and pride became sudden terror and sorrow. Only moments earlier, she was exulting in her triumph, but now she was racked with anguish and remorse. Dionysus, the god Pentheus had disrespected, chose this moment to show his full divine nature. He appeared in a radiant form, shining with supreme power, and spoke with a booming voice. Facing Cadmus and the devastated Agave, who still held Pentheus's head, Dionysus declared that the king's savage end was deserved for his cruelty, pride, and denial of the god's might. Yet his wrath was not satisfied by Pentheus's demise alone. He announced a harsher doom for Cadmus and Agave, holding them accountable for their roles in this grim affair. The former ruler of Thebes and his daughter, who once took pride in their noble blood, would be banished and transformed into snakes, fated to wander the earth as beasts. They would carry their remorse and disgrace for all time. This revelation from Dionysus shook Agave to her core. She fell apart in sorrow, lamenting her deeds and the doom now placed on her household. A short while ago she had boasted of her bravery, but now she saw herself as a cursed monster, fated to a life of misery. Cadmus, who had watched his family's collapse, shared in her sorrow. He grieved for Pentheus, the beloved grandson meant to inherit Thebes. This catastrophe overwhelmed the aging king, who saw his hopes for honor and success disintegrate before his eyes. Seeing the ruin that had struck Thebes, Dionysus defended his severe response as justice for Pentheus and his people's contempt and pride. He remembered how they had mocked him, broken his divine commands, and forbidden his worship. The king's death and the exile of Cadmus and Agave were the unavoidable results of their defiance and disbelief. Sorrowful and remorseful, Agave pleaded with Dionysus for mercy. She admitted her wrongs and recognized the harm she had done. But the god told her it was too late to seek pardon. Pentheus was gone, and the curse on her kin could not be undone, so Agave had to face the outcome of her deeds. Crushed and ashamed, she parted from her father and left Thebes with the other Bacchantes. She walked away from her home, family, and past, bearing the weight of remorse and sorrow. The fate of Pentheus and Agave serves as a cautionary tale for anyone who dares to challenge the gods and nature's balance. Their tragedy reminds us that pride and doubt can bring destruction, and the wrath of the divine can be both severe and unforgiving.